Hey, how's it going everyone? When it comes to power scaling, versus battles are probably the most common form of theory crafting for comparing characters from two separate verses. Two or more characters in an arena of your choice or an empty white background, with the only rule being, fight to the death. While this is all good and fun, it can also feel a bit derivative, and sometimes it's more fun to spice things up a bit. One of my Discord members crafted an idea where Naruto and Killer Bee attempt to stop a Buster Call while on Turtle Island. As soon as I read it, I started to think about all the possible ways that this event could go down and how attuning certain conditions for this idea could actually have an impact on the overall battle. The fleet size will be 10 warships, each carrying at least 1,000 soldiers with 5 vice admirals in command of the operation and Fujitora overseeing said operation. As for Naruto and Killer Bee, we'll be using the versions of the characters from the start of the war arc to about its midway point. I'll use every feat for the characters from chapter 505 when Naruto unlocks KCM to chapter 570 just before he unlocks KCM 2. I thought it would be interesting to see whether or not Naruto and Bee at this point in the story could deal with such a massive military force. So with all that out of the way, let's begin. As the Fourth Great Ninja War ensued, Obito and Kabuto devised a plan where they would capture the Jinchuriki of the Eight and Nine Tails by manipulating a third-party military faction, the world government's navy. By using the bit of research that Kabuto had dug up on the Void Century as a catalyst, they ensured the government that this research originated from Turtle Island, where Naruto and Bee were currently training. They stoked the flames by informing them that within the island lay two individuals that held a destructive power equal to a Buster Call, and with not much time to deliberate the validity of these claims, due to Emperor Monkey D. Luffy's commandeering of Egghead, Fleet Admiral Akainu sent a Buster Call towards Turtle Island. While training to perfect his control of the Ninetales chakra mode, Naruto and Bee feel a large rumbling emanating from the outside. Upon exiting their training room, Naruto comes across a small unit of Leaf Ninja ready to escort him out of the island. They inform him of a massive enemy fleet already firing at the island, but Naruto refuses their help since he befriended the animals and can't let their home be destroyed. As more cannon fire hits the island, Naruto and Bee run towards the coast, stopping as many cannonballs as possible. As they reach it, they see a massive fleet of battleships. For those of you that may not know, a Buster Call is the ultimate form of military attack used by the Marines. These 10 battleships carrying about 1,000 men each are used to bombard an island the world government deems too dangerous for its status quo into smithereens, leaving a scorched aftermath devoid of life. I think it's safe to say that if successful, even Turtle Island is going to find itself underwater. Commanding these battleships are the 5 Vice Admirals Dahl, Bluegrass, Doberman, Pomsky, and Red King. They were technically supposed to be sent to Egghead, but in all honesty they have some of the best feats that I can talk about since the Vice Admirals don't always seem like the most impressive Marine soldiers. Now, moving on to the actual scaling, I'm going to start off with Naruto and Bee, since the pair is quite relative in most regards, with a few potential differences in their stats. Since I'm going to be using every feat for KCM Naruto between chapters 505 to 570, I think it's important to, at the very least, establish a baseline. Naruto is the faster combatant of the pair, at least in my opinion. Just before entering the Fourth Great Ninja War, he showed his resolve to the Raikage, dodging his top speed punch. I talked about this feat quite a bit in some of my other videos, but the gist is that A should be anywhere between almost the speed of light in his V1 Lightning Cloak, and is generally considered to be at least light speed while using his V2 Lightning Cloak. Considering that Naruto was capable of dodging his top speed punch, that should put him somewhere relativistic to the speed of light, to an arbitrary value of FTL that I cannot tell you since there's no way of quantifying it within the context of the story. I know it sounds weird, but I don't go by pixel scaling or physics-based calcs. I go by what is written canonically in the story. And there is no statement and no implication of how much faster Naruto could be than A. In terms of attack potency, there's a couple of ways that we can ascertain at the very least what Naruto's high end is. While fighting Madara Uchiha with the Kazekage and Tsuchikage's platoon, one of his clones unleashes a massive Rasengan that was blocked by the Susanoo ribcage. In a databook statement, Sage Jiraiya's massive Rasengan was stated to be capable of carving away at mountains. While there isn't an exact way to bridge the performance of these specific versions of these characters, I believe that at least for the purposes of this video, it's completely fine to say that Naruto's massive Rasengan is, at the very least, relative to Jiraiya's Sage-amped massive Rasengan, if not a little weaker since Sage Mode is a 10 times amp. Especially when you consider that the entire narrative of the Pain arc implies that he surpassed his former teacher, and later on he stated that he was stronger now than when he defeated Pain. Albeit, he was using KCM at the time, so it's up for interpretation whether or not you think he meant his overall capabilities or just through KCM. As for his Rasen Shuriken, it's the strongest jutsu in his arsenal up until this point. Exactly how much more powerful it could potentially be over even a massive Rasengan can be a bit ambiguous, but we at least have a decent scale for how much more potent of a jutsu it can be, considering that he could push back Kurama about as much, if not more, than 26 Sage-amped massive Rasengans. Since he was in Sage Mode during both of these feats, it's fair to say that a Rasen Shuriken is about 25 to 26 times stronger than a massive Rasengan in terms of overall attack potency. I think it makes sense for the Rasen Shuriken to also be within this mountain-busting AP range, considering that he used it in conjunction with Bee's Tailed Beast Bomb and Itachi's Yasaka Magatama in order to destroy Nagato's Planetary Devastation core. One could say that narratively, Kishimoto implied these techniques are relative. Of course, this is all up for interpretation. As for Killer Bee, his capabilities on the battlefield are a lot more simple than Naruto's by comparison. He mostly focuses on using a combination of his 8 sword-style handling blades, taijutsu in the form of his lariats, and most importantly, his utilization of his Tailed Beast Chakra as a perfect Jinchuriki. He's perfectly mastered the Tailed Beast Cloaks, partial transformations, and full host transformations, which I will refer to as FHT for the rest of the video, that allow him to take full advantage of the walking nuke factory living inside of him. His movements can be so unorthodox to the point that he can completely overwhelm the kinetic vision of someone like MS Sasuke. His lariats, while amped by a Tailed Beast Cloak, can completely bust wide open someone's chest and lower midsection. He can even use Lightning Chakra to amplify his blades, increasing their capacity to penetrate objects and people. And finally, he technically does have the capacity to run at the very least at almost the speed of light, thanks to the double lariat statement that he just so happens to share alongside A. It's arguable whether or not he can run at light speed or faster than light speeds, depending on how big of an amp you think the V2 Tailed Beast Cloak is in comparison to the V1 Cloak. If you ask me, Naruto and Bee possess more than enough firepower to single-handedly take out one of these marine battleships. While these ships do have a length of about 60 meters, which makes them at least 3 times larger than your average Tailed Beast, I don't believe that a single ship is taking down a Tailed Beast on its own unless it just stands there completely still. A Buster Call fleet may be composed of approximately 10,000 marine soldiers, however most of them are not that powerful by comparison to even the average shinobi. Generally equipped with only rifles and pistols, the average marine soldier doesn't really have a lot going for them other than the potential one-piece human physiology that may make them tougher than your average human across other verses. In reality, the reason why a Buster Call is so dangerous and so powerful is because most islands don't have the military power to even remotely undermine its onslaught. The length of time that it takes for a Buster Call to completely burn down an island is unknown. However, the consistent and repeated fire of the massive cannonballs are effective enough to ignite the island in a torrent of flames shortly after the bombardment begins. While I don't believe that Turtle Island can go completely unscathed, even if Naruto and Bee are capable of stopping it, the damage shouldn't be too severe if Bee immediately goes for an FHT and starts bombarding the ships with Tailed Beast Bombs. It was displayed in the 4th Great Ninja War that he does have the capacity to shoot multiple Tailed Beast Bombs in rapid succession, up to 4 to be exact. That should immediately take out about 40% of the ships, and even though they are much larger than the A-Tails, the capacity to blow up mountains sort of eclipses whatever size difference could potentially exist between the ships and our ninja protagonists. While I don't believe that Naruto would have the capacity to instantly destroy an entire ship on his own in a single attack, since his Rasen Shuriken's explosive radius isn't anywhere near as large as a Tailed Beast Bomb, He does have the capacity to make 4 KCM clones that are about as powerful as he is, and each clone is capable of making 1000 normal clones while in base form, which he can use to take on multiple battleships at once if necessary. If we're talking Naruto and Bee versus just the ships and the marine soldiers, the fight is extremely one-sided in my opinion. However, a Buster Call is usually commanded by 5 Vice Admirals, so the real question here is, do they tip the scales in the Marines' favor? Unless your name is Monkey D. Garp, it is not uncommon for the average viewer to completely undermine and even downplay how powerful a Vice Admiral really is. Before researching this video, even I didn't really put much thought into how strong these guys can really be. I wanted to select 5 Vice Admirals that had some level of quantifiable feats, or at least that were impressive enough to where I could have this discussion in the first place. In reality, there aren't that many great moments for most Vice Admirals, but the ones that appeared in Egghead did provide some pretty interesting scaling that one might miss on their initial read-through of this arc. Vice Admiral Dahl isn't just the poster child for why Gooners should join the Marines. She's legitimately a powerful combatant that is capable of one-shotting a pacifista in the manga and two-shotting it in the anime. I want to focus more on the anime version because we got a better idea of how hard she can hit even without potentially using haki. As a reminder, the pacifista are no joke. These almost 23-foot-tall cyborgs can shoot beams of light which have a lock-on feature and have bodies of steel that are so tough it took the entirety of the Straw Hat crew to defeat one of these things back in pre-timeskip Sabaody Archipelago. For context, by the time of Enies Lobby, Zoro fought Kaku, who used one of his most powerful attacks, Rankyaku Amanadachi, to completely sever the entirety of the tower they were fighting on. When Luffy used third gear, he not only punches Rob Lucci through a massive building wall, but then proceeds to destroy a Navy battleship mid-Buster Call using some kicks from third gear while trying to hit Rob Lucci. His kick also extended to about half the size of a 60-meter long battleship. In order to take down a single first-generation pacifista, the Straw Hats needed to hit it with multiple blunt force, slashing, and exploding attacks, a lightning bolt through its midsection, its own explosive beam of light blowing up on its own head, a high-heat kick from Sanji, and Zoro's Asura, which is more powerful than Kaku's Rankyaku, and finally, Luffy's giant rifle. Vice Admiral Dahl took one of these things out in 2 kicks. I'm sure some people would try to bridge this with Luffy's post-time skip second gear one-shot of a pacifista, where in that feat, the pacifista exploded. However, when taking into account the context that the Marines have direct orders to not destroy the Mark III pacifista since they are massive military assets, I believe that this makes Dahl's feat about as impressive as Luffy's, especially since she's arguably not using haki, unlike Luffy, who was using second gear and color of armament. Considering that she can also use advanced armament haki emission in order to bring down the giant Kashi in a single barrage, I think it's at the very least fair to say that she has experience fighting extremely large opponents like the Tailed Beasts. I want to emphasize that this feat does have some merit for her being capable of combating against even 8 Tails Bee, because the giant she took out was also 17 meters tall, which is the same exact size as Gamabunta's cannon height. Since Gamabunta fought Shukaku, who was slightly taller than him, and Shukaku scales to about the same size as all the other tailed beasts, I think it's fair to say that Bee, at his biggest, is anywhere around 17 to 20 meters tall, give or take. I know it's a bit strange to hear me say that the walking nuke factories that are the tailed beasts are only about 17 meters tall, but I have absolutely nothing to go off of. There isn't a single canon statement within the entirety of the Naruto manga that implies the height of any of the tailed beasts, and to reiterate, I don't use pixel scaling because whatever number someone gets is technically not canon. Next, let's talk about Vice Admiral Bluegrass. Unlike all the other Vice Admirals, she doesn't rely on raw physical stats, besides maybe speed, in order to defeat her opponents. She is a Devil Fruit user that ate the Nori Nori no Mi, which turned her into a driving human. By taking a ride on an object or person, she can gain full control over whomever or whatever she is riding, regardless of their free will or anything influencing them. She was capable of riding a Pacifista and a Sea Beast and controlled them regardless of the Pacifista's command hierarchy and the Sea Beast's instincts. She's honestly one of the more complicated characters to talk about when it comes to this specific topic, which I will go into shortly. Vice Admiral Red King may look weird and is definitely up there in the top 5 worst One Piece character designs, but I genuinely wouldn't sleep on his right hook. To quickly go on a size comparison tangent, he one-shots and shatters a large portion of the Hippo Sea Beast's helmet while it was trying to attack a Navy battleship. The Sea Beasts dwarf these battleships by a large margin. And as a reminder, the best I can give Bee while using FHT is 17 to 20 meters, give or take, due to Gamabunta canonically being 17 meters tall. There's at least a very good argument that given the massive difference in scale between tailed beasts and these modified sea beasts, that Red King should be capable of knocking away Killer Bee. Finally, Vice Admirals Pomsky and Doberman don't have the most feats for me to really use. Pomsky is an Otter Zoan user who can knock out a Mark III Pacifista with a single kick, and Doberman usually stays with the battleships to pass along orders. Due to a lack of necessary feats, and for the purposes of this video, we'll just say that they'll stay back with the fleet in order to hand out orders and protect the ships if Naruto and Bee invade them. So now that we've got a baseline for these characters, how would Naruto and Bee fare? So here's the thing. Assuming that Bee shoots down 4 battleships, the Vice Admirals would immediately have to make their move in order to mitigate as many casualties as possible. Doing so would limit the ship's bombardment of Turtle Island since they wouldn't want to catch the Vice Admirals in the crossfire. As they approach Naruto and Bee, things get a bit complicated. A lot of what I'm about to say will heavily depend on how one chooses to believe certain interactions will go down. For starters, how do the Vice Admirals deal with tailed beast bombs? I'm sure this is one of the first things one might think of considering that it is the most destructive attack on Naruto and Bee's side. However, there may be an argument that they can counter the tailed beast bomb by sending it back at Bee. We know for a fact the tailed beast bombs don't exactly explode on contact. The tailed beast bomb clash, Bee catching Kurama's tailed beast bomb, and the Ten Tails flicking Bee's bomb back at him are all good examples of these attacks not exploding the moment they make contact with anything. Considering that Doll and the other Vice Admirals have the capacity to fly and use the 6 powers alongside ACOA emission in Doll's case, it may be possible that they can send Bee's tailed beast bomb back at him given their raw physical capabilities. I know it sounds preposterous, and I'm not saying that Doll or Red King are as physically strong as the Ten Tails who could flick one of these attacks back with a single finger, but what I am saying is that given the massive difference in raw physical strength when it comes to One Piece humans versus Naruto humans, the Vice Admirals might have the necessary strength to pull such a feat off. Regardless, they should be capable of at least dodging these attacks given their potential speed. In all honesty, it's a bit difficult to actually scale the Vice Admirals to light speed or FTL speeds through their own quantifiable feats alone. They did tag the Pacifistas before they shot their beams of light, but the Marines also shot cannon fire at the Pacifistas before they could shoot. One might argue that this cannon fire is faster than the Vice Admirals, but they didn't necessarily have to be traveling at their top speed, especially if it was a coordinated assault. While there isn't an exact way to bridge these characters together, under the assumption that they are at least relative to Sentomaru, who could clash with and react to Kizaru, who is FTL, and I'm gonna be blatantly honest here, Kizaru is objectively faster than light. Given that he has plenty of feats and the initial speed that his Devil Fruit would naturally grant him leads me to believe that he can move it faster than light speeds. I'm not gonna go too deep into that line of scaling, but if you don't want to take my word for it, I have an entire video going over the light speed meta, and I do talk about Kizaru to a decent extent. Sentomaru blocks a kick from Kizaru and even outran a barrage of light beams. If any of the Vice Admirals are even remotely relative to Sentomaru of all characters, then they should be capable of reacting to and dodging light speed attacks. In addition, these Vice Admirals should also scale above pre-time skip Luffy and Zoro, who have consistent light speed feats via dodging Kuma's pad cannon and the Pacifista light beams. Bee would likely be astonished that Doll, Bluegrass, and Red King are about as fast, arguably faster, than A, and he would likely attempt to swat them away with his tails. Since the Vice Admirals can fly via moonwalk, they should have the capacity to easily avoid any ranged melee attacks from Bee's tails. The thing that complicates this fight as a whole is the potential interaction between Bluegrass and Bee, since she can likely move at light speed via scaling above pre-timeskip Zoro and Luffy, and given that the other Vice Admirals will also be attacking Naruto and Bee, there is an extremely likely chance she hops on Bee's back and takes over his body. I have no idea if Bee or Gyuki can withstand her Devil Fruit ability. Bluegrass states that she can ride an individual regardless of anything else. The issue here is that Bee does technically have Gyuki, whom he can swap with, but I'm not exactly sure why that would prevent Bluegrass from controlling them, let alone why it would break her control. This is definitely one of those interactions where you have to believe that Bee has some way of breaking out of her control, and no, this is not like Genjutsu in the slightest bit, and unfortunately, since she's only displayed this ability to control others against a giant sea beast and a pacifista with no will, it makes the whole interaction come down to your own headcanon and beliefs. In my opinion, I lean more towards her controlling Bee regardless of what he or Gyuki can do because of her statement. With that being said, if she gets a hold of Bee, Naruto is probably screwed. There is a potential way that Naruto can get out of this by creating two clones to stall Doll and Red King, and then summoning Gamabunta or any of the other giant toads in order to deal with Bee while he tries to get her off of him. Since Bluegrass has to remain connected to her ride in order to control it, and a giant toad is currently pressing both her and Bee, I think it's reasonable to argue that Naruto can remove her from Bee at least by threatening a large-scale attack like a massive Rasengan. But it could end up hitting Bee, and since she's a Haki and Rokushiki user, she should be capable of easily dismounting Bee and avoiding the attack. As for whatever giant toad summon that Naruto brings out, they shouldn't have to worry about Bluegrass taking control of it since Naruto can just release the summon. Bee would likely have to transform back into his base form, or at least a lower-tailed beast state, in order to avoid being mounted as easily. There is a potential argument that could be made that if Naruto and Bee both land their strongest attacks on the Vice Admirals, the damage could be catastrophic, although I'm not exactly sure if Bee's tailed beast bomb is even remotely as powerful while in V2 Cloak. While I don't believe a Rasen Shuriken or a Tailed Beast Bomb can outright kill them, it's very difficult to properly gauge the high-end durability of the Vice Admirals without making a ton of assumptions. One could at least argue that they should scale above Pell, who survived a city-wide nuke, but the scaling doesn't necessarily have a proper bridge, and one could just argue a Zoan user has innate high durability. For the purposes of this video, I'm willing to concede that if Naruto or an FHTB land their respective ultimate jutsu, they should at least incapacitate the Vice Admirals. It's definitely easier said than done because they do have observation haki, which would always inform them of their opponent's intent, and they should have the necessary speed to avoid them. What makes this scenario difficult to break down is that the Vice Admirals as a whole don't really have many feats or statements that can be directly used to quantify the entirety of their capabilities. Trying to bridge these characters to others that share the same rank, like Smoker, isn't the most consistent way to get a scale because in One Piece, characters of similar ranks and titles vary greatly in terms of their overall capabilities. Adding the Vice Admirals to this fight creates an interesting dynamic where Bee can't rely on FHT since he can always be taken over by Bluegrass unless Naruto leaves a clone on top of him. I can very easily understand why most people would raise an eyebrow at me saying that the Vice Admirals stand a very decent chance at dealing with both perfect Jinchuriki, given the size and scale of the giant beings that they have consistently dealt with and their potential speed scaling. The argument isn't as fallacious as one would initially think. The lack of feats or statements for the Vice Admirals, let alone most Vice Admirals, makes it very difficult to say definitively whether or not Naruto and Bee are cooked. I'll at least say that if you believe the Vice Admirals dealing with giant sea beasts and one-shotting pacifistas scales their AP relative to post-time skip Luffy, then there is a very easy argument that Naruto and Bee get overwhelmed, considering that they would have to be fighting at top speed consistently in order to react to the Vice Admirals. If you think that the Vice Admirals' durability is equal to their AP, which in all honesty isn't isn't always true because Bee could barely tank his own tailed beast bomb, then they should be capable of tanking hits from Bee or Naruto even if they have to land multiple hits. Naruto can always make up to 4 KCM clones in order to combat the 3 Vice Admirals, which would also give him and Bee a decent chance at overpowering them since it would be a 6v3. Pomsky could head to the island in order to even out their numbers, and the fleet could resume their bombardment in order to force at least 1 or 2 clones to focus on the massive explosions. I think it's fair to say that Naruto and Bee can be potentially overwhelmed, but I'm not against the notion that they can make it out of this if they fight as optimally as possible. Naruto would need to land at least 1 to maybe multiple Rasen Shurikens on a Vice Admiral without running out of KCM in order to solidly take them out. And in all honesty, it shouldn't be that difficult considering that the amount of jutsu just one of these clones can employ before running out of KCM. If the third Raikage, who had an affinity weakness to wind style, could tank a Rasen Shuriken, I believe the Vice Admirals with armament coating can deal with them as well. He would also have to land them in spite of their observation haki, which would always inform them of his position and intent regardless of shadow clones. Without FHT, I'm not sure if Bee would be capable of outputting the same raw damage as a Rasen Shuriken, especially since he never performs a tailed beast bomb in V2. Again, all of this is based on whether or not you think the Vice Admirals are durable enough and have the necessary damage output to definitively put down Bee and Naruto. If Naruto reverts to his base form, both he and Bee might end up losing. I'm aware that a single clone could keep up with the third Raikage while using Sage Mode, but Lord Third doesn't have a single feat or statement that implies he's Lightspeed, and his version of the Lightning Cloak functions differently from the fourth. Naruto would need to gather Nature Energy, which shouldn't be too difficult, but I don't believe Sage Mode will make that much of a difference regardless of him making 1,000 Shadow Clones, since the Vice Admirals can always get out of his range through greater raw speed and Moonwalk. Sage Mode doesn't last forever, and if Bee can't rely on FHT because Bluegrass is there, then they'll start running out of options. Base Naruto can make over 1,000 clones, and some of them could be used to protect Bee from Bluegrass, but I don't believe that dividing that much chakra and power 1,000-fold would make that much of a difference, considering that they would be way weaker and slower than the Vice Admirals. In my opinion, at the very worst, they would be a nuisance. I think the Vice Admirals make this entire scenario closer than one would initially think. If you don't agree with any of the scaling I had to bridge for the Vice Admirals, then Naruto and Bee would have a much easier time dealing with the Marines. I think there may be a chance for them to win if they fight as optimally as possible, but I do have to say that I think their chances are very slim since they're fighting 5 combatants that have precognition, who can keep up with them physically, and have the ability to fly and the raw force to take down creatures and giants as large, if not larger, than a tailed beast. I would give Naruto and Bee a, I don't know, 20 to 25% chance of dealing with the entire force of a Buster Call if I were being generous, and 100% chance if it were just the ships. I know I mentioned Fujitora at the start of the video, but honestly, after all the research I did for the Vice Admirals, he makes this fight so one-sided that it felt like a hydrogen bomb and an army versus a coughing baby. If you want to hear my thoughts on how Naruto and Bee could potentially turn the tide of the battle so that Fujitora has to join, then let me know down in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Peace out.